Interview. Today we're actually going to be interviewing Carly. However, we're doing things a little bit differently this time. This time, Carly's actually going to be the one that will be joining me, and she is going to be the one that actually interviews me. So if you're a business owner and you're wanting to buy property, then this is actually the perfect Insta Live for you, because that's exactly what we're going to be talking about with Carly today. So Carly, thanks for joining me. It's going to be a little bit weird having you interview me, but that's okay, because you can then pull out all of the different questions and answers from me all around. If you're a business owner, what do you got to do to actually be buy a house? Because it's very different from if you aren't a business owner.
This
So
is
thanks for joining me.
something that most people don't recognize, and I know we've talked about this off camera before, but the biggest thing that I'm really focused on now is like future
Yeah.
planning. I've been doing a lot of work behind the scenes, setting up the back end of my business, and I'm 38, and I know that eventually I do want to own a house, and I think, we've talked before about it's not that easy. So I guess my first question is, what do I need to start getting in line now, and how long do I need to allow to do that before I can even start even thinking about buying a home? I'm
Yeah.
currently a sole trader,
Yep.
and I'm working with my accountant to set up a company structure.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's all sort of up in the air at the moment, and now I'm asking those difficult questions.
And they are difficult questions, and it's great for chatting to your accountant, because as you go through the process, and certainly as you've got that eye on the future, there's a lot of different things that you need to take into account as a business owner. And I guess one of the things is that as a business owner, you can have so many different structures. You can have being a sole trader, you can have having a company. Some people use a trust. There's different ways that you can actually structure your business. And when you've got, you've made that decision of which one is the right way for you to go, what we then find is that actually you need a period of time where you have been running that business. And if you decide to start a company, then all of a sudden things like an ABN number is changing, and you've got a company ABN number. And so that company ABN number needs to be active for a period of time before a bank is actually going to want to talk to you. I think one of the things that also people don't necessarily realize is that if you're a business owner, excuse me, you are planning so much further in advance. So you and I are having this chat now, and one of the things will be you might not actually buy a home for another 2 years. And that's actually still relatively quick for a business owner. It's a whole different kettle of fish. It's not just, I have to have a deposit, because it's that, but it's also making sure that when you go to any bank, or you start speaking with a mortgage broker like myself, that actually you've done all of the other steps. So does that answer your question?
It does, and this is something that as the more I chat to people like yourself or my accountant, people who are experts in their field, the more I realize, wow, there's so much groundwork I need to do before I can even consider getting into the real estate market. Most obviously is I have to show that my company makes money, and if I'm currently changing structure like you just said, that's going to basically put me back to zero. And aside from that, you need to show that there's profitability, right? So a lot of
You
sole
do.
traders think that if you just run your business and put everything through your business so that, you're minimizing your tax, that's great up until you actually want to start looking at finance options, right?
Correct. And companies do the exact same thing as well. It's a often led by an accountant. An accountant, if they don't know that you're wanting to purchase a property in the next 2-3 years, their goal is always to minimize your tax. And in minimizing your tax, which is great, it then means that from the bank's perspective, it looks like you're not earning very much money. And from the bank's perspective, they want to know that the company is profitable, and not just profitable enough to pay you, but to also then pay any debts that the director might have, as well as the company in itself. And so actually having that conversation and saying, hey, accountant, I would really like to buy a house in the next 2 to 3 years. Let's start preparing so that when you're doing your BAS, when you're doing your tax returns, you're actually making sure that they're showing more profit. And yes, you pay more in tax, which is, kind of sucky. But it then means that once you get to the point of actually applying for finance with the bank, they go, yep, great, you've got heaps of cash here. Not a problem. You haven't expensed absolutely everything. You actually have profit sitting there, and that's what they then use to help you go, yes, you can afford the repayments on a mortgage.
And I mean, anyone that watches the news or reads at any media at the moment, there is all this talk and speculation about a collapse, the interest rates going up, cost of living. As a business owner, obviously we have the same expenses as your average person. So, it's not like there's a separate Bowser for business owners to buy their petrol, or there's a separate grocery store. And I think often people have that misconception that business owners are just making extraordinary amounts of profits. No, we're all being squeezed at the same time. And most notably, those cost of living expenses, your utilities, your consumables, they're all going up. What are things that you could be doing today to help you start to prepare for that? Because, all this speculation and discussion around, real estate's getting completely unachievable, especially for millennials, which I am, and Gen Z. You need this massive deposit. And that's just if you're someone that's employed full time. You add all the complications of being either a sole trader or having a company, and there's all these extra barriers for you ever entering the market. What are things that the average business owner can be doing to sort of start looking at, okay, if our accountants told us to typically expense everything, are we now looking at different ways to curve our overheads? Are there different things that we should be thinking of that we start to implement into our day-to-day operations?
Yeah, and I would say I'm actually a really big proponent and supporter of a method that's called profit first. And it came out of America, I don't know how long ago, by somebody, Mike, whatever.
I've got the book literally right here.
Oh, there you go.
And
it's great. It really is. It's so simple, and I think
I can't pronounce
the way that. Oh yeah, well, I think the way that I would explain it is it's kind of like the Barefoot Investor, but for business owners.
Yeah.
So he really just talks about having different buckets to be able to go, okay, you've had $1 come in. Now of that dollar, you then put 5% into a profit account. You put 15% into a owner's share account to be able to pay yourself if it's just you and your business. You put a certain percentage into expenses to then be able to pay all of your expenses, all of your overheads, all of your staff. You put a certain amount then into your tax in the GST. And where I see a lot of people as they're starting to go, I want to prepare, they forget that as part of increasing how much they earn, so they've got a deposit, it increases how much you then have to pay in tax. And that ends up being one of the things that for a lot of people, they end up taking the money that they thought was going to be the deposit for a house and using that to then pay the ATO, which sets you back a bit. And I mean, that's not to say you can't use something like lender's mortgage insurance. Lender's mortgage insurance it's an insurance for the bank, but it means that for us, normal people, we don't have to have a 20% deposit. And as a business owner, you might, depending on what your business is, you might have a massive profit margin, which is great. You might be able to get that 20% deposit. But if you run a business that has really tight margins, then actually using something like lender's mortgage insurance will mean that you don't have to save as much as of a deposit. And really, at that point, the bank is looking at it going, do you have a healthy business? And a healthy business is you're able to cover all of your expenses, but you're also able to set some money aside. You're able to pay yourself. And that's where I find like this Profit First book, I mean, it is, I guess, an American style of thing. And the only thing I would change is if you're the only person in your business, so a micro business, you don't employ other staff, then you actually want to have 30% or 28% of every dollar you earn going into a tax account as a net figure. So instead of going, this is the gross amount that I've had come in, actually just going, this is the gross, I've taken off the GST, I put that into a tax account, and then going, okay, 28%, 30% of that figure, I'm then putting into a tax account, which will then mean that by the time you do your tax and you're doing all your BAS, you've got enough money left over. And so if you're sitting there going, hold on a second, my expenses are really high, then yeah, maybe it is a case of actually just looking to see, is there something that you can do to reduce your expenses?
Yeah.
But also then looking at it and going, are there other ways that I could earn more money? Are there other ways that I could perhaps automate some of what I do, or, do other things? Like you've got your cohort. It's a different revenue stream to working in a studio and taking photos of people. It's different. And that's something that I think a lot of people, especially business owners, slowly start to wrap their heads around, because they go, oh, I need more than just what my core offering is. I need to find other ways to bring in cash, especially when there is cost of living. And yes, there aren't, unfortunately, special events that we can go to where we can perhaps buy super cheap petrol or super cheap food. Or
I wish. I mean, I do see this a lot, like, whether it's myself in my business. I have two businesses. I have my studio, which is its own separate entity. I also have my photography business. And through my photography business, I do photography, obviously, and I do graphic design, but I also run online mentoring. And at the moment, like you just said, I have my cohort. And so my core business actually has about 4 or 5 different revenue streams. And you can even add in there, I sell prints when I take beautiful photos of spectacular auroras in Melbourne, or I've got a book, I've got downloads. So I'm always looking at different ways to add multiple different revenue streams, and they don't always make money. It's just they're there for the times that, maybe my photography is in a lull or designs in a lull. And I think where a lot of business owners are getting tripped over at the moment is traditional spending has gone out the window. Like I know in my industry, there used to be those massive big deals, 40, 50, 60, 100K advertising jobs. And they're just a dime a dozen now, unfortunately. And, there's a multitude of reasons for that. People aren't spending the way they are anymore. And I know that, when you start looking at things like long term, I want to plan to own a home one day, and, maybe you want to have family. They require a lot more consideration long before that choice is actually made. And something that I'm looking at now is like, do I want a commercial property? Do I want to own a warehouse first? Do I want to, a residential property? Have you got any suggestions for business owners whether commercial or residential is a better, more viable option?
So it's an interesting one, because with a business owner, going down the commercial route can actually be a better option. So sometimes you can get, say, mixed use properties. So it might be that actually you get a place to live, and you then also get a commercial space for your own business. So for example, we've got a client at the moment, and she's got a dog grooming business, and she's bought a commercial retail facility to be able to have the dog grooming, but then it also actually has residential living upstairs. She can start renting now, and she can actually live there, as well as moving her business into that retail space, which means she's no longer paying commercial rent at another location. She's gotten rid of essentially like 2 different types of rent that she's been paying just with that one purchase. And it really comes down to, with a commercial facility, it's done a bit differently. It's got different terms associated with it from a bank's point of view. It isn't necessarily a 30-year loan term like it would be with a residential house. It will be that it has, say, a 20-year loan term. So different factors, which means the repayments can be slightly higher. But the other thing is, with residential compared to commercial, if you go down commercial, you pay for a lot of the different things that the bank would do for free on the residential side. So the bank will do a valuation of a home. And if you get a residential property, the bank basically pays for that valuation, for the bank valuation to happen. From a commercial side of things, you as the buyer actually pays for that. And that could be a couple of $1,000s for that to happen. And a big part of it is that commercial properties are different. There's a lot more nuances around whether it's going to be a great property or not. And the way they determine the value isn't just bricks and mortar, it's what's possible from that particular property inside of it. You know, if there's already a business in there, how profitable is that business that's using that property? Those things come into account as well. But I would say for some business owners, buying a commercial property is actually the first property that they want to be buying because they're going to be getting a greater value out of it, especially if they're already renting somewhere else. Because all of a sudden that rent, they're actually just moving that into paying off their own asset.
Yeah.
But
it's interesting now having the studio and having a commercial lease, and you look at it's always plus. It's rent plus outgoings plus utilities and all the other costs associated with that. And you know, for anyone that's not familiar, a commercial lease is actually quite a kick in the teeth when you undertake it. And you look at, you know, okay, if that's the initial outgoings of the business, that's before you've even put the business in the warehouse. So, you know, we just renovated the studio. We spent a lot of money doing it up, making it look really pretty. We're in the hole. And I thought to myself, you know, a huge chunk of that is the rent itself, the utilities. Is it more viable to buy this and have it long term? And, you know, is it the same kind of return from it when you like look at a residential? Obviously, the market's gone up and up and up and up. Are we looking at those same trends in the commercial property sector, or is it less susceptible?
Yeah, so commercial property is far more susceptible to what is actually happening in the economy as a whole. Residential is, I mean, almost bulletproof at this stage. You know, it's so different. Yeah, exactly. Everybody needs a house. Whereas commercial, when the economy, you know, is starting to tank, commercial is doing the same. So it follows what's happening in the economy because it is commercial. You know, they're businesses. Those businesses are susceptible to if there's new regulation that the government is bringing in, or if there are new taxes that the government are bringing in, all of those things, those companies, they're susceptible to that. They're the ones that are wearing the brunt of that first before it flows through to everybody else. But what you also then find is with commercial, there are, if your own business ends up going out of business, like if you end up going into liquidation or you go into administration, you still own that property. And actually at that point, then you almost turn into an investor because you can then find another company, another business to then rent that commercial space out. And if you've chosen well and it's a great location and, you know, it's the type of commercial property that other businesses want to use, then in a weird way, yes, maybe it sucks that your business didn't do well, but you still have an asset that you're then able to generate an income from renting it out. As well as, like you kind of just touched on it before, you know, getting the studio up and running. With commercial property, if you want to do any renovations to that property, like if you don't like the color of it, it's not the landlord's job to paint anything. If something breaks, if the toilet stops working for whatever reason, it's not the landlord's job to fix it, it's the tenant's job. The tenant is the one that actually then has to cover all of those costs. If you want to get a warehouse and fit it out to become a bakery, well, that's on the person that's actually renting the place out. It's not on the landlord. And that's where I see, yeah, again, some people, especially business owners, kind of go, I'm going to buy commercial first and then a residential place.
Yeah.
You know,
It's definitely, and you know, this is something you and I have talked about off camera. It's definitely something that I'm looking at long term as well, particularly when you look at what your annual rent is outgoings, having both a residential rent and a commercial rent and all the associated costs, you start to go, wow, I hadn't thought about buying a house for a while now because I just thought, rental crisis, market crashes, all that sort of stuff. It all sort of seems above my head. But thankfully, with good people like yourself around, I've been able to have these conversations where I'm like, oh, maybe this is an option for me. Maybe this is something I can do, because expenditure wise, I'm covering 2 rents at the moment, so it's like, can we bring those together, and can I position myself in a way to make me look a little bit more attractive to a bank to lend me that commercial lease? So what's the first thing I should be looking at doing, apart from obviously getting a good accountant and a broker? What are my first steps if I want to start looking into this?
Yeah, so one of the very first things that you want to do is actually just check what your company tax return, your personal tax return was last financial year. So that will then become your basis of, actually, is there anything in there that really says you ran at a loss? If you're running at a loss and that was put in because your accountant expensed absolutely everything to be able to create a loss, even if it's through depreciation, then the bank's going to look at it and go, okay, well, you started at a loss. Now we want to look at the next 12 months, so this current financial year, making sure that actually by the end of the financial year, you've got some profit there. And even if all you've got is $10 profit, you actually then have a profit. And so then from the bank's point of view, what they look at it is go, okay, you've got some form of profit. Fantastic. That's a great start. And actually, we can then start to use that and go, okay, you paid rent, so there's money there. You've paid yourself a wage or dividends or however you've done it, you've broken it up, but you've paid yourself some money. And as soon as they start to go, yep, let's add all of these different things back, they go, yeah, okay, you made $10 profit, but actually you put out $60,000 in rent. So that $60,000 can then be added to the new mortgage repayments. Is that enough to cover things? Maybe, maybe not. You also paid yourself, let's say, an exorbitantly high amount of money because you traveled a lot and you bought lots of luxury things. Maybe, I don't know. All of a sudden you're like, oh,
I feel attacked.
Yeah. But then some of those things we can just sort of start to add back, and it starts to look better. But it started from the place of going, okay, there has to be some level of profit. And it doesn't have to be a lot, but if there's just even the littlest of bits of profit.
Keeper's in the chat, Leah, and she's laughing.
But this is how it goes. Like you have to get everybody on board. Everybody's kind of got to know, hey, I've got this dream of buying a house.
Yeah.
And so it's like, yeah, okay, let's work towards that. Because everybody knows that until there's a reason for why you shouldn't be expensing absolutely everything, then we're going to expense everything. That's just what we all do, because the tax is exorbitant.
100%. And I mean, I'm someone that used to have a company, and then, I had a liquidation. Now I'm a sole trader, and I'm in the process of just trying to figure out, now I've got 2 businesses. What do I do here? I bought a established business. So the studio itself is I've got a partner in it. So I'm like, there's all this structural stuff that I'm looking at going, what are the right choices? Because, often when we enter into these things, you don't know what you don't know, right? So it's people like yourselves who are experts in your field that are going to help us shape that. And my bookkeeper Leah's in the chat, and so between the group of people that I've now got around me, I'm trying to become a lot more financially literate, because I want to be able to make these decisions in the future. And I think the first thing I want to do is buy a warehouse where I can somewhat live above it, and I have to make peace with the fact that it will probably be cold and uncomfortable, and I have 2 dogs. But then you've got that old caveat of, if it's commercial property, you're not meant to be living in it. So there's all right, where do you find one of those properties that has space above, that is residential, that you can use below as a studio? There's all these considerations. And So as far as who's important to have in your team, who would you suggest are the right people? Because there's lots of shady people out there that'll tell you all sorts of things. Who is the best like little team that you can put around you to start making these decisions?
Yeah. So I think you kind of mentioned it before. Really, it really is actually just having firstly a chat to your accountant to say, hey, when we're doing your tax, keep in mind I want to buy a house, so we can't expense absolutely everything. We're not getting to the point where we want all our tax to be like basically nilled out. You want to be paying tax, because if you're paying tax, it means you've made a profit. Ironically, it's a good thing in this situation. But then also you mentioned like Leah, like your bookkeeper, and having your bookkeeper on board and going, hey, you know, you've spent maybe a bit too much in expenses over the last month or over the last quarter. Hey,
I'm sure
how about we think of some creative ways to cut some of these costs? You know, it's that kind of thing. And then, you know, I mean, people like me, yay, where you get to actually just have some of those initial chats and go, I've got some broad questions here, and I just need a little bit of guidance on what's those next steps. And so it really is a case of just going, okay, hey, accountant, I want to buy a house. Hey, bookkeeper, I want to buy a house, and help me to keep my expenses. You know, let's try and keep our expenses at say 30% of what our net income is. But having some of those really blunt conversations, because when any expert, when any business owner is looking at it, you get stuck in your own world. Like for me, I'm in numbers all the time. It's what I do. But you're a photographer. Why on earth would you be paying?
We don't do numbers.
No. And so actually just saying, hey, bookkeeper, hey, accountant, I want to do this stuff. Keep me accountable for where I'm going. You know, can you just remind me, what percentages are we sitting at? Am I putting enough money aside for tax, or have I just jumped up another tax bracket and I need to adjust how much I'm setting aside for tax?
Yeah.
You know, some of those things that, I don't know, they can seem daunting if you're not a numbers person, but as long as you're working with good people that are numbers people, like your bookkeeper and your accountant and your mortgage broker, then they will help to guide you towards, yep, you're making progress, and you know, you're hitting some of these little milestones along the way.
Yeah. Lots to think about.
Oh, yes.
So, you know, last little thing, is there hope for millennials and Gen Z like me to get into this market? Is it still accessible?
Yes. Yeah, 100%. And I mean, I find it slightly amusing, because if you take a bit of a morbid approach, to be honest, there's a lot of baby boomers, but they're all going to die. And when that happens, property prices will start to drop, because there's more houses. Like a lot of people, they need to sell their home to be able to move into a nursing home. If you want to get into an okay nursing home, you're looking at having to put down a bond of like $500,000. And that means that those people, most of them, they're selling their house to be able to cover that bond to get into a nursing home. So, you know, there is hope, because just the way demographics works, and this is, I think, you know, that's a bigger conversation, there is hope, because there is going to be that shift. And there's a lot less millennials and Gen Zs and, you know, all of us than what there are baby boomers.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting, because if you listen to the headlines, they'll have you thinking this defeatist attitude, like, that's it, it's stuffed, you'll never get in, it's impossible. I like to think that when someone tells me impossible, that's a challenge. So that's good to know. So now I know what I need to do, and I'm going to have Leah and my accountant and you all on my back to be like, oi.
Making progress, kicking goals. And you got to celebrate those wins too, as well, you know. I mean, actually just going, and this is why I like the profit first method, because if you're putting cash aside to be your profit, then it also means that you know, at the end of a quarter or at the end of, you know, half year or full year, you can take a little bit of that cash and just go, I'm actually just going to celebrate that I'm making good progress. I'm actually moving towards what your ultimate goal is of, buying a house or buying commercial property, whatever it is.
My problem is I have those celebrations weekly, not annually.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
So
well,
things to work on. Things to work on.
yeah,
But,
those celebrations should become smaller, like one piece
and
of
less expensive. Maybe a few less traveling overseas trips as well.
Unless somebody else is going to pay for it, then
Yes, exactly. Oh, well, thank you so much. That was really helpful. I appreciate that. And if people like have questions about this, are brokers the first people that we should be talking to when it comes to, you know, these kind of questions?
Yes, and your accountant. Yeah. So brokers will help you, and certainly I would always say reach out to a few different brokers just to have an initial chat, because one of the things is, like an accountant, you know, like a doctor even, you know, different types of brokers, you know, they speak differently, they have different ways of actually working, and you'll find some are really helpful and you, I don't know, like you just like their vibe, and others you perhaps don't. So find the right one for you and the way that you know, think about things. They're able to answer questions in the way that you understand. And at least then you've got one person in your team. My guess would be for most business owners that, you know, are out there, they already have an accountant. So just making sure that you're actually starting to communicate with that accountant a little bit more. So, you know, if all you're doing is sending off your BAS stuff to them and you're not really talking to them other than, here's all my income, here's all my expenses, maybe pick up the phone and have a chat to them.
Yeah. I've realized how important having a good accountant is too. I mean, traditionally I've always been like an accountant schmountant, right? But now I've actually got an accountant who gives a shit and explains it to me, and I don't feel like, you know, someone's just like yelling at me all the time. I've got someone who's actually interested in me learning and understanding, and it's been really eye-opening. So now what I've always sort of passed off as like impossible or, you know, too hard basket, now I'm like, oh, hang on a minute, this is actually achievable. And I think that's where I get kind of frustrated, because I do feel like a lot of this stuff is gatekept. I feel like a lot of people who are more established, or, you know, I don't want to assume it's the baby boomers, but they seem to be the ones that they don't want to give you this financial literacy. They don't want you to feel like it's accessible. You know, that's why we're constantly told, you know, it's, the housing crisis is upon us. You know, avocado toast is why you can't buy a house. All these kind of funny things that come out of those discussions. Yeah. If you understand things and you set it up properly, it's actually a lot more achievable. So, thanks for having this chat.
And I feel like it really is a big thing of actually just finding the people that you're comfortable asking questions of. Because if you're not comfortable asking a silly question or a dumb question from that professional that you're working with, then you're not going to get anywhere. It's going to be super frustrating. You just have to actually have the people that you are comfortable asking questions of around you. So but thank you very much for joining me.
It's
been fun.
This is good.
It's been weird to get interviewed in reverse, but it's great.
I keep kicking my phone. Thank you so much. And this is your live, but if you follow me, you should be following Eddie, and vice versa.
Exactly. Yes. Well, thank you, and we'll speak again sometime soon.
See you. Bye.